hey there. Welcome back to another episode of the Pursue Your Spark podcast. I'm your host, Heike Yates, and today we're talking everything osteoporosis. I know you heard the word because you're the woman over 50 who is in menopause, has started menopause, and is dealing with the hormonal changes which also affect your bone health. Our expert today is talking everything inside out, literally, bone health. How to eat, how to exercise, what to avoid, what to look for. And it is super important that we know the facts of osteoporosis so we can start even before we're 50 to bone up. And as Justine is talking about today, we're building up our bone bank account. And you will hear this several times in the show, to build up your bone bank account. Before we dive in, I want you to know that we just started the 4-week lean out program. And it is not too late to sign up. We'll leave a link in the show notes so you can start as soon as you hear this episode. Grab the link in the show notes and join all the other women in the 4-week lean out program. So let's dive into today's show. Hi there, you're listening to the Pursue Your Spark podcast. I'm your host and fitness warrior, Heike Yates. And on this show, we empower women over 50 to take back their health and strength with sound fitness, nutrition, and mindset strategies. Our guests on the show share their honest stories so that you'll have the courage to take action, knowing that you're not alone in your struggles. Well, hello there, and welcome to the Pursue Your Spark podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Justine Bernard. She received her doctorate in physical therapy from Columbia University in New York City, which is a college of physicians and surgeons specializing in neurological and orthopedic rehabilitation. After returning to Washington, D.C., Justine started Elements Fitness and Wellness Center. She's a former professional dancer, Gyrotonic Master Trainer, and an international presenter lecturing on osteoporosis and exercise. Welcome to the show, Justine.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure having you here. And always, if I can, I like to share the how did we meet story if I know the person, which I do know you for 10 years at least.
Yes.
So do you want to tell the story?
Sure, I'll tell the story. So I met Heike when you reached out to me because you needed a new home for your Pilates equipment and for your teaching. And I was very excited to hear from you. And you founded Pilates at Elements Center. So before I met you, we just had the Gyrotonic method and physical therapy. And you added Pilates, which we still have and love. And I'm always grateful to you for starting our program.
Oh my God, I'm so grateful to you, eternally grateful, because I had nowhere that I could fit in with what I was doing. So you saved me. And for those of you who are wondering what Gyrotonics is, we'll talk about this in a little bit. But first, I want Justine to tell us her journey of where she is now, from where she started and where she is now. And you start wherever you like, Justine.
Okay. Well, it all started, no, just kidding. So I was always a dancer, started dancing as a little kid and then pursued it through high school. And after high school, I did decide to go to university. And after university, where I was dancing, I actually headed up a dance company in college. And then I moved to New York to be a dancer. And I was on the scholarship program at Alvin Ailey. And with all the training and running and work I was doing, I hurt my back. I was overtraining and found the Gyrotonic method, which we'll talk about later. And that, starting to teach that in the early 90s, I realized how much I enjoyed working with the body and different muscles and different aspects and movement. So I decided to learn more science behind the art of the Gyrotonic method and went to physical therapy school in 2001. And then after graduating with my doctorate, I moved back to Washington, D.C. And that's where I started my orthopedic outpatient and fitness studio.
Mm-hmm. So you said you love in bones. What do you love about the bone?
Oh, yes, I didn't mention the osteoporosis part. So the bones, yeah. So in about 2008, someone from Gyrotonic headquarters reached out to me to present at a conference in California on osteoporosis. And that's when I went to the NIH medical library and started all this research and read every article I could find and started designing programs for my clients with osteoporosis. And each year I become more fascinated with the bones. The bones are kind of the unsung organ of the body. They do so much more than just hold us up. They're in our sympathetic and parasympathetic flight or fight system. They're involved. They release a hormone in that system, just even more so than adrenaline and osteoclantin, it's called.
Uh-huh.
And the research on that is fascinating. Also, we'll talk about nutrition later, but the research that's coming out on how food supports or doesn't support bone health. And anyways, I just get more and more fascinated each year on the new discoveries regarding bones.
Yeah, since we're talking about the importance of preventing osteoporosis and how to build better bones is our overarching topic today. So tell our listeners, what is osteoporosis? We hear the word, but I'm sure many of us don't even know really what that means.
Yes, that's a very good question. So osteoporosis, osteo is bone, and porosis is for porous. So if you think of a sponge, the inside of many of our bones, especially our vertebra, it's a spongy bone, a trabecular bone. And if you think of the little holes in a sponge, we want those holes, right? So that the bones can move, they can absorb shock, these things. But if the holes get too big, or the little architecture around the holes get too thin, that's when we develop what we diagnose as osteoporosis. And we diagnose it based on density of our bone. So often people will go and it's called a DEXA scan, and that's a bone scan. It's an X-ray, a dual X-ray image, and then the density of that bone is measured, and then you're put into kind of a category based on your T-score. So what does that mean? So they'll either say you have normal bone, or they'll say you have some bone loss, which puts you in the osteopenia category, or they'll say you have bone loss to the extent that you're at an increased risk of fracturing. So that's negative 2.5 T-score, and that would be osteoporosis. And then the last one is osteoporosis with a fracture, and that would be the severe osteoporosis category. And at that point, you're at a much higher risk of fracturing. So 50% of people with osteoporosis who fracture will fracture again within a year. So that is a severe category, and you definitely want to seek treatment. But at the osteopenia side, it is a wonderful time, and with osteoporosis, to work on prevention.
Now, when you say you get a DEXA scan, would you know without a DEXA scan that you have osteoporosis? Are there any signs that you could notice?
That's a great question. There actually is not. So you have to go off more what your risks are. So osteoporosis is a silent disease. No one really knows that they're developing it. However, if you've had like a first-degree relative, so a mom, a sister, an aunt, who's had osteoporosis or osteoporosis with a fracture especially, you would want to get a bone scan, or at least let your doctor know that you have a family history. That's a big one. Another one is we develop what I like to call our bone bank account, right? Our savings account. before the age of 25, right? So if you know that you weren't very healthy, or maybe you had anorexia, or you overexercised as a kid, because 90% of women with anorexia, it occurs before the age of 25 when we're trying to build up our bank account, build up our savings account. So if you know that for yourself, you may want to let your doctor know, and they can put that down as a risk factor so that you can get a bone scan. So basically, every female over the age of 65 should definitely get a scan. But any female over the age of 55 with some risk factors should also get a scan.
Which is definitely our population, the women over 50. And we're talking about this a little bit later about menopause and effects of the spine and osteoporosis. But you said that women at a certain age are more likely to have osteoporosis. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, correct. So men tend to with the higher testosterone levels, have a higher bone density to begin with. So if they lose some bone, which men also can get osteoporosis, and especially over the age of 70, but they have a larger bank account to draw from, larger savings of bones. So if they lose some bone, it doesn't put them as high a risk for fracturing as it would a female, because we have a little lower bank account there to draw from. So the osteoporosis in and of itself isn't a problem, right? So we don't even know we have it. Maybe we have some bone loss. We don't even know it. The problem is the fractures. So like you said, you mentioned the spine. So the three primary locations for fracturing are the wrist, the spine, and the hip. Mm-hmm. So they measure often these three locations. Sometimes they'll just do two with the bone scans. So those are the three locations. And if you fracture a wrist, it is frustrating. You can't do a lot. It's amazing how much we need two hands to do many of our activities. But if you fracture your hip, it can be a lot more significant. So people with osteoporosis who've had a hip fracture, their actual mortality increases. So their chances of dying within a year of a hip fracture goes up. So you may have had, as I teach this course, I hear more and more about people whose parents, for example, had a hip fracture, and then within a year they had passed away. So a lot of, we call them activities of daily living, ADLs, are no longer as accessible after hip fracture. So maybe if they used to go walk to the park or go to the coffee shop or something like this, now they need assistance or a walker, and kind of this quality of life starts spiraling down. So hip fractures can be very significant. And then the spine you mentioned. So spine fractures, we have a lot of organs there, right? We got our stomach and our lungs. So with the spine fracture, we tend to start compressing vital organs, and it can affect digestion. It can affect breathing, just the amount of oxygen. And also, as we know, those nerves, which can be very painful, like causing sciatica and all these painful things, they just have a little less space if you have a compression fracture of the spine. So then it can cause a lot of pain as well. Mm-hmm. So this is why we really want to avoid fractures of the spine and the hip. And to do that, to put us at less risk for fracturing, we want to avoid getting osteoporosis.
So does it mean you get a fracture only when you fall, or can you fracture just because you set your butt down a little harder than normally?
Really good question. So for the hip, about 95% of fractures of the hip happen due to falls. So, and then, falls can be very preventable. You can just do some things like putting those little sticky things at the bottom of your bathtub, making sure your steps aren't slippery or you have handrails there, wearing socks or slippers in the house that have the stickies on them, making sure your carpets are tacked down and you're not tripping over the edge of a rug, little things like that, even putting lighting up. So if you do have to use the restroom in the middle of the night, you have a little bit of lighting. I had a gentleman, he was 90, and he put those little holiday lights, those little white lights around his baseboard. So in the evening, he'd plug those in, and he had a little light path to follow.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. And I had another client who put in a Ziploc bag, she'd put some cat litter. So if it was winter and slippery out, icy, she'd have some cat litter to sprinkle down, make sure she wouldn't slip on the ice. These little things that can prevent a fall and prevent a fracture in the hip. So, and then of course, sorry, was it? Of course, balance exercises, right? So we forget how we lose balance sometimes. Gymnasts practice it all the time, right? And then we won't practice for a while, and then I'll do some balance exercises. Like, wow, I really should do more of this. So
that standing on one leg exercise can sometimes be really difficult.
Exactly. It's like, wait, I used to be able to do this. What happened? So yeah.
What is the difference between osteoporosis and osteopenia?
Good question. So osteopenia is bone loss. And that is, so normal, so T-scores, I don't know if you've ever had a test in college or something and it was curved, that bell curve. So they'll give you, based on an average adult person, a score of your bone density. And so osteopenia is -1 to -2.5. And then osteoporosis is -2.5 and below. So each time you drop one of those numbers, so when you go from 0 to -1 to -2, your risk of fracturing doubles, right? So you want to stay in a osteopenia and not drop into that osteoporosis category where your chance of fracturing goes up. Now, I don't say that for fear. I don't like fear-based medicine, but just as knowledge that you try not to drop into that -2.5.
Because it's good to know that you talk about the numbers too, because I remember when I had my first and one and only DEXA scan ever, they gave me some numbers and they're like, mumble, mumble, mumble. I'm like, so what does that mean now?
Exactly.
Like, do I know what that all means? And they're like, you're fine. I'm like, well, I'm fine. What does that mean? You know,
yeah.
Is there a measure of sorts? I almost like to have a measure, like, am I on the good side? I'm on the middle side. I'm on the good side, but at the bad end, or so I can take action.
Exactly. So most of my initial sessions with any person with osteoporosis, we go through the scan. We go through the whole scan. We talk about all the numbers, where the bone loss is, and how we're going to treat it based on where the location is and all of that stuff. Now, the National Osteoporosis Foundation, NOF.org, has a ton of information on it. It even has a little place to go through your bone scans on the website. So I highly recommend that organization for information. It's well researched. And yeah, anyways, so that's one way to go through your scan. We go through scans in our support groups. We go through scans in our sessions. It is good to know your numbers and where your bone loss is. So I mentioned the falls for the hip fracture, but for the spine posture, you can get it from compression fractures. So that's something like bending over into your trunk and lifting something heavy out of your trunk. So it's the bending with the weight, that compression, that can cause a fracture. So it's good to know, is it in your spine or is it in your hip or is it in your wrist? Because you'll do different exercises based on the location.
Yeah, we put also a link in the show notes, guys, of the Osteoarthritis Foundation, so you can just click and get to that link that Justine just mentioned. Now, Justine, what are the first steps for someone that was just diagnosed with osteoporosis? Is what should they do other than seeing you and getting a consultation, of course?
Okay, so I do recommend trying to look through your scan and just notice if those negative numbers tend to be more in the spine or more in the hip. So if you find that the negative numbers are more in the hip, you really want to focus on balance to prevent a fall, and you need some impact. So in the femur, so they say hip, but it's really more the femur, your leg bone that they're measuring. And there is something that says femoral neck, and that is a part of the bone that tends to fracture, but there's no muscular attachments there, right? So if you see an x-ray, often you'll see on your bone, there's parts that are more white. Those are the denser parts, and often there's muscles that attach, like your greater trochanter, all your glute muscles, right? But on this part of the bone, there's no muscular attachment. So the way to strengthen it is through impact. So if you tend to just bike ride and swim, you may want to start walking. If you're walking, you may want to start a little bit of a jog or a little bit more, or walking faster to get a bit more impact into that bone. So that's one way you can start building bone in your femur or your hip, and then the falls. And then if you're noticing that the bone loss is more in the spine, then you'll want to start strengthening your postural muscles. So some of those, we call them superwoman exercises, when you lie on your belly and you do some of the leg and arm extension exercises, or some rows, these kind of exercises for your back, for all the muscles that help you sit up straight. Those are the ones. And then you want to just be very mindful how you're picking things up. When I talk to exercise instructors, I just ask them, this is a great, all exercise is great, right? Exercise is so vital for our being as humans, but some exercises have a higher risk versus the reward, right? So for example, sit-ups or curling all the way up, there are some wonderful benefits to those exercises, but for someone with osteoporosis in the spine, the risks outweigh the benefits. So at that point, it would be better to strengthen your abdominals with some exercises where your spine is elongated, like planks or, the marching, these kind of abdominal exercises.
Yeah, I agree with what you said. It's like the exercise, the benefits outweigh the risk. And I think there are still coaches out there who don't think about this kind of movement and what should be eliminated. And I know from my practice that the bending forward in a twist, lifting something out of the trunk is bad news for
bad news. Shoveling snow, raking, vacuuming, all these things where you're twisting and bending, they can be done, but with proper alignment, or else the risk is too high.
Now, I have a cute story. One of my clients has osteoporosis and she has spine fractures. So she's in the top numbers of really, really at risk. So she's in an assisted living. And of course, she's cleaning her own apartment at the moment with Corona. We will say the word. We hopefully at this point, we're way past this, but she is now sitting down and vacuuming. She has her vacuum and she is 83 years old and she uses her bestest posture, as I like to call it. And then she starts vacuuming the surroundings. And then she gets to the next chair and vacuum. And I was so proud of her. I said, "You become the sexy cleaner lady. I love it."
Yes. Yep.
She's smart about it and said, Heike said, I mean, I have balance problems to begin with, and I'm not strong, and I shouldn't bend forward. So what do?
I sit and vacuum. There you go.
So I want to go into how important exercise is, and why do we need exercise, and what types of exercises with osteoporosis.
Well, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but exercise is always vital for everything.
Exercise is good for you. That's my motto.
Right. There is nothing that wouldn't benefit from exercise. But so it's vital. The bones need to be stimulated through exercise, through impact, through weight, right? So for example, one of the big risks of going out for the astronauts going in outer space without gravity is they have major bone loss upon returning. Some can't even walk. So it is extremely important that we do exercise that is weight bearing so that gravity is taking effect on our bones, the weight. So again, things like swimming and cycling, amazing exercises for the heart, cardiovascularly, all these things. But for bones, you need more impact. You need to walk, you need to jog if your knees, ankles, if your body can tolerate jogging. So impact and weight. The bones need to be stimulated more than they're used to. So one thing that's a little difficult with the gyrotonic method and the Pilates method is some of the weights tend to be quite low. So you have to work, when I work with the gyrotonic instructors, I have to say, you need to incorporate exercises where after 8 to 10 repetitions, the person is fatigued, where those bones have been stimulated more than they're used to. So if you're used to doing, a bicep curl with 5 pounds and doing 20 repetitions, you need to switch to more strength training than just endurance training.
Which is a great point right now is tell our listeners, what is Gyrotonics? What do you do? And how does this whole system work?
Right. That's a good question. So the Gyrotonic method was created back in the 70s by a man named Julia Horvath. And it incorporates so many aspects, including breathing. It actually includes the meridians from acupuncture and Tai Chi, that energetic aspect of the body, as well as movement through all ranges. So it initially started similar to Pilates in the dance world. Dancers loved it because it did take the body through a full range. And so it's an exercise method that uses breath, energy, and weights. So there's two, kind of like Pilates in the sense that there's equipment and a mat class. In Gyrotonic, there's the gyrokinesis class, which starts on stools on the floor and standing. And then there's the equipment, which uses cables, pulleys, and weights. So those are the two systems that I train in. I'm a master trainer, just meaning that I can do teacher training. Yep. And I love it. I think it's fabulous. With any system, if you have osteoporosis and you're starting with any teacher, always make sure they have a background in osteoporosis. So many exercise systems can benefit bones. You just want to make sure your trainer is very educated in the diagnosis.
Now, you said we're starting out with lighter weights and fewer repetitions. So, and then go to like maybe dumbbells, or what would a progression be like?
Yes. So, it really depends on the fitness level of the client to begin with. So I have people coming in with osteoporosis and they kind of just crossed over the border. So maybe they had osteopenia for years and then they went through menopause. So the first 5 to 7 years post-menopause is when the bone drops the most. So you really want to build up your bank account prior to menopause if possible, and then keep it up there during. And then after that, you're going to be pretty good to go if you keep yourself out of that osteoporosis range through menopause. So if you have never lifted weights, you're just going to start with a lower weight. You can start with your body weight, squats and lunges and these Superwoman exercises, and then start adding. I like to use TheraBands a lot because they're so convenient. I can give them out like candy, and they can pack them in a suitcase and they can take them wherever you go. So then I tend to add the TheraBands for resistance. So body weight, TheraBands, and then dumbbells are great as well, as long as you keep your spine nice and elongated as you use them. And so I give kind of the magic number of 8 to 10 reps. So if you're already doing 12 repetitions of something and it's not that difficult, you need to add more weight. Yeah.
I agree. I love the progression because working at your studio, I saw what Gyrotonic looks like, and it looks really fancy. I always thought of it, it's like the movements of Martha Graham that does the circular, big, elaborate, juicy movements. That's what it always looked like to me.
Yes, it is a beautiful method. Sometimes I'm teaching a group class on the towers and I just step back and say, wow, everyone looks so beautiful. If you ever been danced as a kid or in high school or wherever, it brings you back to that feeling of movement and dance. It's such a luscious system. It's great.
Yeah, and it's what, if you guys don't know, the tower is not a tower of doom or the tower with Rapunzel on top. No, it's a piece of very elaborate and beautiful piece of equipment in the gyrotonic system.
Yeah.
So we just want to make sure that people don't think the tower.
What's the tower? Right.
They're looking at Pilates and they say, "Oh, this looks like a torture chamber right there."
Yeah, it can be a little intimidating, but it's really, we have clients from 9 years old and 90 years old, and it's such a, and well, it won't be, Corona will be over by the time you hear this, but with the breathing exercises that are so vital, and people are realizing now how important training the cardiovascular system, not just in a sense of running and jogging, but in actual rib expansion, costal expansion, movement of the lungs and the ribs. I mean, it's such a, and also being able to hold your breath for a long time, as well as on the inhale and on the exhale, this whole vasovagal response. I mean, it's just training breath and breathing so vital as well.
And we know that from our daily practice with our clients, that most people breathe shallow, or they tend to hold their breath, and they are scared of breath holding, is what I found. That they're, oh my God, if I can't breathe in right away, I'm gonna faint. I'm like, no.
Right. No. Yeah.
Super important.
Yeah.
But what is also important is nutrition when it comes to osteoporosis. So Justine, what do we eat? Why should we eat? How should we eat? How do we, like you say, I love this term, build up your bank account?
Yes. So if you just want numbers, you should have about 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium a day. So that's just kind of a roundabout number. But if you think about a yogurt has about 100 milligrams, so, or 10 grams, right? So that would be like 10 yogurts a day. That's a lot, right? So just get a variety of foods. If you don't eat dairy, you're gonna have to be a little bit more conscious about it. For example, I'm not a big milk drinker. I don't really like it, but there's almond milk that is fortified. So I tried to get that one that has calcium and vitamin D in it, because there are almond milks that are not fortified and they're quite low in calcium and vitamin D. So just be aware. I try to get my people to eat at least one high calcium meal a day. So whatever that means for you, whether you like, fatty fish or cheese or whatever. Some dark leafy greens are high in calcium. You have to eat quite a bit, and some dark leafy greens actually block calcium absorption. So although they're extremely healthy and I highly recommend them, it really is hard to get. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, really, it's hard to get your calcium in. But what's fascinating is I teach this all over the world, and it seems like every culture has their high calcium food. And I taught in Israel recently, and tahini is actually very high in calcium. So I had no idea. So if you are a vegan, tahini is a sesame paste that is quite high in calcium. And then something that's kind of fascinating that came out a few years ago, there's been about 5, probably more now, research studies with over 500 subjects showing that prunes, whatever antioxidant is in prunes, helps the bone builder cells build your bank account. So those are the osteoblasts, help build bone. So the studies have 10 prunes a day. Again, that's a lot of prunes.
Whoa, that's a lot of prunes.
That's a lot of prunes, but just like 10 yogurts is a lot of yogurt. So, eat a variety, but it was interesting because they tested figs, strawberries, I think, and blueberries, but the prunes were the only ones that actually helped bone density. So, calcium and vitamin D are vital for our bones, but there's so much we don't know. So just, a variety of foods. Oh, vitamin D. Speaking of vitamin D, I highly recommend getting tested. Next time you just have a checkup, they probably will test it, but it is good to know your levels. Just like with your bone scan levels, it's good to know your vitamin D levels. Get those up. Whether you get some sunshine or fatty fish or supplements, it's get your vitamin D levels up to normal range.
I'm curious about that myself because every time I go to my doctor and I don't know if you remember, but I don't have a thyroid, so I have to get checked and get my medications to get my thyroid function
Mm-hmm.
through my supplements, and they always test my vitamin D. Now, I'm a triathlete. I'm out like, I don't know how many hours a day in the sun, so I should not be deficient in vitamin D. I eat super healthy. I eat from all the food groups, and yet I'm still low on vitamin D. What's your take on that?
I'm so glad you brought up thyroid. So my people with thyroid conditions, especially if they're on, so if they're low thyroid, hypothyroid, or don't have a thyroid and they're on medication, I work with their endocrinologist because exercise alone will not do all of it. Okay, so if someone is on thyroid medication and they're just losing too much bone, I highly recommend checking with the endocrinologist and see if the levels of thyroid medication can be modified safely. Because it is, the thyroid and the parathyroid, especially too, affects your bone density and that kind of balance of bone breakdown and bone building. So it's important to break down bone. You don't want bone that's too old that might crumble or crack. You want new bone. So you do break down bone and then you build more bone to replace it. It's just when that breaking down and building balance gets off. And with any thyroid medication, it affects that balance. So you want to check on that.
Yeah, and it seems like that I need different levels during the times of when I'm getting ready for a race because I train way more intensive than in a downtime where I'm just like staying fit. And so that's when he's like, okay, we need to up your vitamin D again, or we'll need to lower your thyroid meds a little bit. So it's, and when you think about you're taking them, and I know that I've talked to other people that do have thyroids, but they're on supplements to regulate their thyroid, that they need to keep checking with their doctor because through my own experience, it's like, it doesn't stay the same. It's not like, oh, a year later, it's still fine.
No, yeah, you have to check, yes, very
I have to
regularly.
go every, sometimes every other month, but usually about every 6 months to see that all my levels are up because he has the same concerns with osteoporosis. He said, if you're hyperthyroidic, you're going to lose bone mass. This is not good.
Yes, that's something to stay very. There are certain medications as the thyroid medications affect bone density dramatically, or also if you've been treated for cancer with chemo or chemo more so than radiation, but that affects bone density dramatically. So I have quite a few patients with post breast cancer who have had bone loss due to the medications. So anything also that blocks absorption of calcium. So if you have reflux or IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, or something that you just know you're not absorbing your nutrients very well, all of those, alcoholism, they all affect your bones. So, yeah.
So keeping a balanced diet and focusing on calcium-rich foods, as well as keeping balanced exercises, strengthening exercises. What does it mean for the women in menopause?
So I like to try to get my women in menopause to get a baseline bone scan. Sometimes you have to be a little careful whether insurance will cover it or not. I taught this course in Mexico and it was only like $25 down there to get a bone scan. I'm like, everyone, just go get a baseline. So that's that's the baseline, right? So it's nice to know where you are going into menopause or in the early phase of menopause so that you can kind of track it to see how your bones are doing. Just like you were saying with your thyroid medication, not that frequently, but usually, every year you can get a bone scan and just see how it's going. Yeah. So if you're in that 50 range, then try to see if you can get insurance to cover the bone scan. Definitely get your vitamin D levels checked. Get your eat your high calcium meals. Do your weight bearing exercises, and those are the. But also know your family history. I have quite a few patients who don't know if maybe their mothers aren't alive anymore, but they're not sure if their mothers had osteoporosis. So if you have the benefit of having your family history, medical history, that's nice to know as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. These are all super duper tips to build up your bank account. I like
Yes, your bone bank account.
If you have osteoporosis in advanced stages, I hear a few of my clients are taking supplements. What's the story there? Supplements as in medication.
Oh, medication?
Medication.
So for supplements, those are all, you have to just watch your absorption. So if you're getting constipated from your supplements, just maybe switch companies, switch brands, ask your doctors. For medications, so medications can play a very valuable role, especially if you've already had quite a lot of bone loss, or you have a strong family history, or you have a lot of risk factors. I have doctors that refer me patients, and they tend to refer me the patients who don't want to use medications, which is lovely. But I also have patients, and it's been very effective for them. So, I'm not kind of a medication supporter fan, but in this case, it can be very helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. So what is your take on preventing osteoporosis naturally?
I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of diet and exercise, as you know,
Yep.
and trying to prevent osteoporosis. I mean, if you just prevent it, if you just don't get it, it's so much easier to manage. You can flex your spine, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to go into this phase of, especially in the gyrotonic method, we do a lot of movement of the spine. And so I'm always trying to get people to just stay under that, stay higher than that negative 2.5, so we don't have to start worrying about whether, it's safe to flex your spine anymore. Mm-hmm. So prevention is the best. And then just couple of things about medication. There are certain medications like the Fosamax that you want to make sure, in case you forgot, your doctor probably told you, but they tell you in, 5 minutes. Once you take it, you don't want to lie down. You want to get that medication down into your stomach, right? Into your intestines, get absorbed by the blood. So don't let it get stuck in your esophagus. So take it, take it with a big cup of water. Don't lie down for 30 minutes afterwards, these kind of things. So just if you are taking medication, read up on them a little bit. As I said before, the National Osteoporosis Foundation, NOF.org, has a ton of information. So you can just go on there and look up your medication and see if there are side effects. Now they are taking a lot of people off their medications after 5 years. They just found that the risk-benefit ratio isn't as great after 5 years. So if you have been on the same medication for a while, check with your doctor. But yes, natural prevention is always my favorite go-to. Try to get your calcium through food, even more than supplements, if possible. All these wonderful things. Yeah.
If somebody is diagnosed with osteoporosis, what is their mental state?
A lot of people are very fearful. There's a lot of fear around fracturing and falling. Mm-hmm. So I find that in that first session, when we go through the bone scan, I am easing people's fears, right? So if you haven't had a fracture previously and you're doing your, exercise and you're eating healthy, usually you don't have to be afraid that you're just going to spontaneously fracture, right? It really is the severe population that has spontaneous fractures. So try to rest your fears. Get informed, get more information from great sources, and get stronger. But yeah, fear's a big one when the first diagnosis comes. So, yeah.
So, Justine, how can people reach you and learn more about you?
So I'm at Elements elementcenter.com. So www.elementcenter.com is the website. My email is Justine@elementcenter.com. Our Facebook is Element Center. Pretty much if you put Element Center, you will find me, you will find us. We do list our support groups on the National Osteoporosis Foundation website. You can find us there as well. We have our support groups 4 times a year, but now that we're online, we're actually doing a lot more frequently. So stay on the lookout. I think those are the best ways to reach me.
Fantastic. Justine, it was a pleasure having you on the show and sharing all that you know about building better bones. And it was lovely to reconnect with you.
Yeah, so fun to hear from you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Justine.
Take care.
So, are you ready to bone up and build up your bank account? Please reach out to Justine on, as you heard, Element Center is everywhere on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and everywhere you want to know more about osteoporosis, the prevention of osteoporosis, and how treatable it is. You can join her courses, but reach out as she is the expert on this topic. And please let us know on social. Reach out and let us know how this episode helped you, and maybe you can share this episode with somebody else who doesn't have the complete information on osteoporosis, its preventability, and its treatments. And I'll see you guys next time on the Pursue Your Spark podcast. Ciao!